Good morning, everybody who has chosen to join this Pastor's Check-In. It's Tuesday morning, and this is Mark here again. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time to listen in. I pray a lot about what to share, what to talk about, and it's amazing how the lessons that we learn in our lives come back and we get a chance to implement the things that we've learned. Let me ask you a question. How are you guys doing with loving your neighbors? Loving anybody else that's not you? These are huge commandments when Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. And the second is just like it, love others, love your neighbors as yourself. We know that, and we've talked about that, and we've sung songs about it, and we've listened to sermons about it, we've read about it. But boy, I'll tell you, implementing loving others like God wants us to love them is definitely a challenge. I just want to share a quick little story of something that I learned, and I share this in the context of really all that's happening right now in our world. There's so much that is unsettled, and there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of fighting, a lot of civil unrest, and at times like this, it's really easy to look outwardly and to see all that's happening, and to have our emotions more centered on the things that are happening out there. But I really believe it's critical that we press pause. Not that we don't want to know what's happening in our world and in our culture, but that we take a look at ourselves, because that's where I believe the power comes from, is really looking inwardly. We don't always necessarily know if there's something going on inside that we need to work on. In Psalm 139, at the end of that, David says, God, search me and know my heart, and test me and know my thoughts. Listen to this. He says, point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life, which implies that David doesn't always necessarily know some of the internal things that are offensive to God. A number of years ago, I encountered a woman who had been coming to our church and wanted to be on the worship team, and she was very adamant about singing, and she was very kind of assertive in what she wanted. The bottom line is she was pushing a lot of buttons in me that kind of made me get defensive. I didn't like the way I was feeling, but I learned something in that, and I learned that the way I started treating her was not as an individual, but I was treating her like a type of an individual. I was treating her as somebody that I had already run into, or maybe a few other people like her. And so I kind of put her in that category of person. And I wasn't treating her as an individual human being, but I was treating her as a type of person. And I realized that I was being prejudiced. I was prejudiced not because of her race or her culture, but because of her personality and who she was. And I just, in this time that we're going through right now, I realized that we need to really take a really good heart check on ourselves, because we may struggle with race and with culture and different things like that, but I believe that there are also things, as we're attempting to understand what it means to love our neighbor, we may confront things in our own lives that we really need to work through, and we really need to allow the power of God to work in us, the power of God that is loving beyond our own ability to love. And so as we navigate these waters that lie ahead, as we look and see all that is happening, the turmoil and the unsettled culture that we live in right now, we ought to very much pray for what's happening in our own country, of course, but let's not overlook ourselves. Let's not overlook what we can do for ourselves. I want to close with one passage. This is wisdom. We need wisdom in a time like this. And this comes out of James. I read this a few weeks ago. I want to read it again. This is James chapter 3. This is verse 17. It says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and good deeds. It shows," listen to this, "it shows no partiality and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of goodness." So let's dig down deep, ask God to continue to work in our own lives and in our own hearts. And let's take on that challenge and see what God has for us. I love you guys. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.